Robert, Murray addressed De Niro, you recently spoke about the political climate in the country, calling it toxic. Could you elaborate on that? De Niro, in a dark blazer, with deep wrinkles that betrayed years of struggle and passion, leaned forward. His eyes blazed. Toxic is an understatement, Ed. We live in a time when people have forgotten what respect is. Politicians, the media, they're all playing their games, and ordinary Americans are paying the price. I grew up in New York, where you had to stand up for yourself, but now it's just a circus, and I'm tired of staying silent. Redford, in a light shirt, sat with his arms crossed. His face, weathered by years of Utah sun, was calm, but the corners of his mouth twitched betrayingly. He cleared his throat, as if trying to hold back words, but couldn't resist. Bob, you've always been loud, he said, a slight irony in his voice. But maybe the problem isn't just the politicians? Maybe all of us, including us actors, are adding fuel to the fire? All these speeches, bold statements, they don't solve anything. The studio fell silent. A technician by the soundboard spilled his coffee, but no one noticed. De Niro turned his head toward Redford, his gaze sharp as a blade. Are you serious, Bob? His voice was low, almost a growl. You're saying I'm adding fuel by telling the truth? I'm not hiding in the mountains of Utah, avoiding the world. I'm here, in reality, where people are losing jobs, where hatred is off the charts. Redford didn't look away. His calm was like a quiet storm before thunder. I'm not hiding, Bob. I just think shouting isn't always the answer. Do you think your words change anything? Or do they just make you a hero to those who already agree with you? Murray tried to intervene, his hands nervously clutching his question sheets. Gentlemen, let's get back to the topic. You've both spoken a lot about social justice in your films. But De Niro wasn't listening. He slammed his fist on the table, not hard, but enough to make the water glass tremble. Justice? He barked. You, Bob, made films about nature, about freedom. But when was the last time you talked about what's really going on? About racism, about poverty? You stepped back, left us to fight this battle alone. Redford narrowed his eyes. His voice turned cold, like a mountain wind. Don't you dare say I stepped back. I founded Sundance to give a voice to those who aren't heard. And you? You just yell at rallies and think that changes something. Have you ever tried listening instead of just talking? The crew froze. One of the cameramen, a young guy with a neck tattoo, whispered to a colleague, "It's like Raging Bull versus Butch Cassidy in real life." But no one laughed. The tension was palpable, like the smell of sweat and metal in the studio. Murray, sensing the interview spiraling into chaos, tried to pivot. Let's talk about your joint projects. You've both worked on films that... No, Ed, De Niro cut him off, his voice quieter but all the more menacing. I want to hear what Bob has to say. He thinks I'm just making noise? Let him tell me how he's changing the world from his ranch. Redford leaned back in his chair. His fingers gripped the armrests so tightly his knuckles turned white. You want the truth, Bob? Fine. I think you're stuck in your anger. You're so busy fighting everyone that you've forgotten why we make movies. We're not politicians. We're storytellers. And if you can't see that, maybe you're the one who's stepped back from reality. The words hung in the air, heavy as the smog over Los Angeles. De Niro opened his mouth but didn't get a chance to respond. Murray stood abruptly. We're taking a break, he said, his voice shaking. We'll be back after the commercials. The cameras cut off, but the tension lingered. Do not switch further, it will be hotter. Gentlemen, let's talk about your recent projects. Bob, he turned to Redford, your new documentary on climate change has sparked a lot of discussion. Why did you decide to revisit this topic? Redford nodded, his voice even but carrying a hint of passion. Climate isn't just about science, Ed. It's about people, about farmers losing crops to drought, about fishermen who can't feed their families because the ocean is empty. I've seen communities in Utah suffer from wildfires. If we don't act, our kids will inherit a desert. De Niro snorted, unable to hold back. All eyes immediately turned to him. What? Redford asked sharply. Nothing, De Niro replied, but his tone was venomous. It's just funny hearing about climate from a guy who flies private jets to his festivals. You're not a farmer, Bob. You're a star. The studio fell silent again. One of the technicians coughed, trying to mask the shock. Murray clutched his papers so tightly they crinkled. Redford slowly turned to De Niro, his voice quiet but sharp as a knife. You really want to go there, Bob? Fine. Let's talk about hypocrisy. You scream about poverty and injustice, but how much do you pay your crew on set? Do they all have health insurance? Or do you just love loud words? De Niro jumped to his feet, his face flushed. Don't you dare accuse me of something you know nothing about. I fight for unions, for actors' rights, for everyone in this industry. And you? You're holed up in Sundance, pretending to save the world while people in the Bronx can't afford medicine. Murray tried to intervene, but his voice was drowned out by the shouting. You have no idea what I do. Redford snapped, also standing. You think your speeches solve problems? You're just fanning the flames of hate, Bob. People are tired of it. And you think your calm fixes anything? De Niro shot back. You ignore reality. Racism, poverty, unemployment, they won't disappear if you make another film about trees. Suddenly, the backstage door slammed. Everyone turned. A young woman, about 30, in a simple denim jacket, stepped into the studio. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with resolve. She held a trembling piece of paper in her hands. This was Anna Cruz, a producer's assistant whom few noticed. But now all eyes were on her. I'm sorry, she said, her voice shaky but clear. But I can't stay silent anymore. Murray, bewildered, waved for the cameras to keep rolling. De Niro and Redford froze, their arguments suddenly fading into the background. My name is Anna, she continued, walking toward the stage. I've been working here, backstage, for 5 years. And I'm tired of hearing you, big stars, argue about who cares more about people. You know what? You both don't see what's happening right under your noses. She held up the paper, a letter printed in small font. This is a petition from the studio workers. We're not heard. We're paid pennies. We have no decent conditions. I take care of my sick mother, but I can't afford her medicine. And I'm not alone. You talk about poverty, Mr. De Niro. You talk about climate, Mr. Redford. But why don't you talk about us? About the people who make your shows possible? The studio plunged into silence. Even the hum of the spotlights seemed to fade. De Niro slowly sat down, his face turning pensive. Redford lowered his gaze, his fingers nervously gripping the edge of the table. Anna turned to Murray. I know they'll probably fire me for this. But I don't care. Someone had to say it. She tossed the petition onto the table and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing loudly in the silence. The door slammed behind her, and the sound seemed to snap everyone awake. Murray, trying to regain control, cleared his throat. Gentlemen, what do you say to that? De Niro looked at the petition, his fingers slowly reaching for the paper. He picked it up, scanned the text, and his face changed. The anger vanished, replaced by something else, perhaps shame. Redford cleared his throat, his voice quiet. She's right, he said, almost a whisper. We're so caught up in ourselves that we don't see what's happening right here. De Niro nodded, his eyes still fixed on the petition. I didn't know, he muttered. We have to fix this. Murray, sensing the moment could be pivotal, leaned forward. So, what do you propose, gentlemen? You both have influence. How can we help Anna and the others? De Niro looked up, his eyes shining, but this time not with anger. We start here, in this studio. I'll talk to the unions, to management. We'll figure out what needs to change. Redford nodded, his voice firmer. And I'm in. If we're going to talk about justice, we have to start with ourselves. I'll reach out to other producers, and we'll set up a fund to support the workers. Murray smiled, his shoulders relaxing for the first time that evening. That sounds like a plan. But, gentlemen, can you work together? After all this? De Niro and Redford exchanged a look. Tension still lingered in their eyes, but something had shifted. Maybe it was respect, maybe understanding. We'll try, De Niro said, a note of reconciliation in his voice for the first time. Redford extended his hand. For Anna, he said. De Niro hesitated for a second, then shook it. For Anna, he echoed. The cameras captured the moment, and the studio erupted in applause. But backstage, Ruth, the producer, stood with her arms crossed. Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. That was unforgettable, he said, rubbing his chin. But will they actually do it? Ruth smiled, her wrinkles deepening. If they don't, Anna won't forgive them. And neither will I. Meanwhile, De Niro and Redford sat in silence, heavy but no longer hostile. De Niro held the petition, his fingers slowly flipping through the pages. The list of grievances was long: low wages, no health insurance, excessive hours, without breaks. At the bottom were dozens of signatures, names of people they'd never noticed. We screwed up, Bob, De Niro said quietly, his voice hoarse with fatigue. I thought I knew what it was like to be in their shoes. But I didn't. Redford nodded, his gaze fixed on the table. Me too, he admitted. I was so focused on big issues, climate, free speech, that I forgot about the people right next to me. Anna was right. We don't see them. The silence stretched, but this time it was different, not tense, but shared, as if two old fighters had finally lowered their fists. Finally, De Niro looked up. So what do we do? He asked, a note of challenge in his voice, but no longer angry. Redford smiled, faintly, but sincerely. We start small, with this studio. We meet with the workers, listen to them. Then, we see where it takes us. De Niro nodded, his eyes narrowing, this time with determination. And no PR, Bob. This isn't for the cameras. This is for them. Redford extended his hand, and this time De Niro shook it without hesitation. Deal. The following weeks were a whirlwind. De Niro and Redford stayed in Los Angeles, canceling several planned shoots and trips. They organized a meeting with the PBS studio workers, not in a shiny conference room, but in an old cafeteria that smelled of grilled sandwiches and instant coffee. The chairs creaked as dozens of people, cameramen, technicians, assistants, sat at long tables. Anna was there, in the same denim jacket, her face tense but her eyes alight. De Niro spoke first, holding the same petition. I'm not going to talk much, he began, his voice as direct as ever. You said you're not being heard. We're here to listen. Tell us everything. At first, people were silent, exchanging uncertain glances. But then Anna spoke. We need decent wages, she said, her voice firm. I make $15 an hour, but it's not enough for rent. And we want insurance. My mom is sick, and I can't help her. Another worker, an older man named Carl, a sound engineer, raised his hand. And the schedule. We work 12-hour shifts with no days off. I haven't seen my granddaughter in 2 months. One by one, people began to speak. Complaints, stories, dreams, it all poured out like water from a breached dam. De Niro and Redford listened without interrupting. At times, De Niro clenched his fists when he heard about injustices, but he held himself back. Redford took notes, his face focused, like a director planning a new scene. After the meeting, they went to the studio's management. The negotiations were tough. Managers insisted the budget was tight, that changes were impossible. But De Niro didn't back down. "You say there's no money?" he barked, his voice filling the room. "What about the bonuses for top executives? We know how much you make. Either we fix this, or I'll make such a stink you'll regret it." Redford, as always, was calmer, but his words cut just as deep. "If you can't find money for the workers, we'll go to the unions. And the press. The choice is yours." 2 weeks later, the studio announced a 20% pay raise for all lower-level workers and the introduction of basic health insurance. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. Anna received a bonus for her courage, and her mother was transferred to a better clinic, funded by a foundation Redford established. A month passed. Los Angeles breathed autumn warmth, the streets smelling of dust and blooming orange trees. De Niro and Redford sat at a small cafe near the studio, at a sidewalk table. Before them were cups of espresso, and between them lay a newspaper with the headline, De Niro and Redford. From feud to justice. Social media was still buzzing, but now the hashtag De Niro versus Redford had shifted to hashtag Together for Change. "You know, I still don't agree with you on politics," De Niro said, his eyes gleaming but without anger. Redford smiled, sipping his coffee. "And I still think you're too loud. But maybe that's not such a bad thing." They laughed quietly but genuinely. At a nearby table, an elderly couple, a man and woman in their 70s, exchanged glances. The man, with a gray beard and a faded Dodgers cap, leaned toward his wife. "That's them, right? The ones who fought on TV?" The woman nodded, her eyes shining. "And look at what they've done. Maybe there's still hope for this country." De Niro and Redford didn't hear the conversation. They looked out at the street, where people hurried about their business, where life went on despite all the differences. Anna's petition lay in Redford's briefcase, a reminder that their work wasn't done. They knew one studio was just a drop in the ocean. Ahead lay other battles, for unions, for the climate, for justice. And they knew they wouldn't always agree. But something had changed that evening in the studio, and that something was stronger than their arguments. "So what's next?" De Niro asked, his voice calm but carrying a spark. Redford looked at him, his eyes glowing with quiet confidence. "Next we listen, and we act. Together."